Napthine is Premier, of course, of Victoria. He's been in the top of politics for a couple of decades. Just over a fortnight, Dr Napthine's future as head of the government in this state will be decided. It's time we got to know the Premier a little better. Dr Napthine, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Dennis.
Two Dennises, two Cat supporters. Who would have thought?
Absolutely fabulous. And I grew up at Winchelsea, not far from Geelong.
I grew up at Ceres.
At Ceres, yeah. Well, Winchelsea is a great place. Ceres is a magnificent place. Home of the Ceres Lookout.
The Ceres Lookout.
And,
I live near it now.
And love the Cats. Love the Cats.
We do love the Cats. You've been opposition leader and a senior government minister. How did your life change when you became Premier?
I think you go into another gear, a bit of overdrive, but it's a great honour and a great privilege. You know, this is a great state here in Victoria, and to be Premier of this great state is an enormous honour and privilege. But in terms of workload, it goes up, 100%, in terms of the daily activities, in terms of the decision making and the responsibility to make sure we drive Victoria forward, to run a good budget, build the infrastructure we need, fund the schools and the hospitals we need, look after Victorian families. That's what it's about. What's
the hardest thing about leading the state? Is there just so much stuff coming at you from every direction?
I think the hardest thing is getting the balance right between what you invest into new infrastructure and what you need for day-to-day activity. They're very hard decisions to make sure, because there's so many great things that we need to be spending money on, so many great demands, but we've only got a limited budget. So they're the really tough decisions. And you can see the needs around you, but you can only spend a certain amount of money, because all the money government spends comes out of the back pockets of Victorian taxpayers and Victorian families.
In 2002, Robert Doyle took the Liberal leadership from you. You had another 8 years in opposition beyond that. You really hung in there.
I'm very persistent. I'm very tough, and I love the job. I love being the local member for South West Coast, a beautiful part of the world. But I love people. I think my family would say that sometimes it drives them to distraction whenever I'm out and about. I'm going to meet people, talk to people, listen to people, and, trying to, if there's things I can do to help them, let's see what we can do to help.
There must be a huge burden of people wanting stuff, though. They're wanting you to make things happen for them when you're out and about.
Oh, there's people who say, yes, my school needs this, or my child with a disability needs additional assistance, or somebody needs hospital services, or the road needs fixing. There's always demands, and what the challenge of government is to get the balance right between making sure we provide funding for our hospitals, our schools, our infrastructure like our roads, our water system, and to make sure we still drive the jobs and the economy of the future.
You'd be pretty happy with the, I think it was 7 News poll that says that most people are in favour now of the East-West?
I think the East-West link, Sir Rod Eddington gave that advice to John Brumby back in 2008. He said there are two major projects Melbourne and Victoria needed: an East-West link to complement the West Gate and City Link, and they needed a major rail project to augment the City Loop. And we're doing both of those, and that's really, really important. Getting the balance right, public transport and roads.
When's the last time you did any veterinary work? Do you worm your own dogs?
I do worm my own dog. Lord Liam, my dog. In fact, I'll tell you, Dennis.
A lord?
Yes. Lord Liam's an interesting story. I had a whippet, and unfortunately she got old.
We've got a lot in common. I had whippets when I was a kid.
And Brandy got old and had to go to God. And 6 months later, I got a call from one of my constituents, an older lady, who was from the Portland Hospital, and she rang me up and she said, "Dennis, you're my local member and you're a vet, and I know you lost your dog 6 months ago." She said, "I've been told I've got to go to a nursing home. My dog's in the kennel at Portland and you've got to look after it. That's your job as my local member." So I rang the kennel up and they said, "No, it's a nice dog." Drove down a couple of days later and it jumped in the back seat of the car. And Liam, as he was called then, joined our family. He's been a part of it ever since. But he's taken over so much he's now been elevated to Lord Liam.
Lord Liam, as many animals need that elevation, or get that elevation. Speaking of family, one of your sons has been through a rough trot. There was a big article in the Herald Sun a few weekends ago. I'm talking about your adopted son, Jack. How is he?
Jack's still struggling with the autoimmune disease, and that'll probably be with him for some time, and he's on relatively high doses of steroids. But Jack's a fighter. He's tough. He's tough.
If you are re-elected, what's the one thing from this next term of Parliament that you'd like to achieve? In a few years' time, what would you like to be able to look back at and go, I did that?
Well, we've promised to deliver 200,000 new jobs over the next 5 years and 60,000 apprenticeships. And I want to achieve that because I think the best way we can grow this great state is to grow more jobs, grow more opportunities, particularly apprenticeships for young people. We need to drive our employment up, and that's what I want to do. And to do that, we need to invest in things like East West Link, which will provide jobs directly, but also provide the infrastructure to provide efficiencies for our businesses so that our businesses can be better able to compete in a global economy, take advantage of the free trade agreement with China, Japan, South Korea. And I think those things are really terrific. But it'll also get people home to their families. And we want to have a richer family life here in Victoria.
Why, and there's been a lot of criticism of this, I've heard Neil speaking about this as well, why are politicians so scripted these days and whose fault is it?
I think that it's very difficult for politicians if you relax and let your guard down. Sometimes something you say is an off-the-cuff remark.
Jeff used to let his guard down.
Well, and Jeff used to get pilloried for it too.
Shovel of dirt at reporters.
Yes, and he used to get into trouble for some of the things he said because sometimes you say things, as a light-hearted throwaway line, but if it's taken in a different context, it can be perhaps determined to be inappropriate and cause some offence to people. So politicians tend to be a little bit more guarded about what they do and how they say things.
I think most people would feel that's a pity.
It is probably a pity, but at the same time, you don't want to unnecessarily cause offence to any individual or any group or any organisation, and you don't want to be seen to be making light of perhaps people who are facing some challenges and difficulties.
Some quick fire answers from you. Your favourite food?
Probably steak, a great eye fillet, beautifully rare. Got to be rare.
Favourite TV show if you get time to watch it ever?
Oh, favourite TV show? Probably the news. Isn't that boring?
Favourite music? If you're in the car, you're travelling between Port Fairy and Melbourne, what would you listen to?
Dennis Walter's Greatest Hits.
That is the worst answer I could have imagined, but very amusing. Favourite holiday spot, or you live in a holiday spot?
I live in Port Fairy, which is just fantastic, and I love the Lower Glenelg National Park down at Nelson. Beautiful part of the world. Cape Bridgewater is the best beach in the world, just out of Portland.
Do you have a hobby?
Mainly walking. I love walking on the beach and I'm a bit interested in the cats, obviously, and horse racing. So all of those things are part of my hobbies.
Well, when it's all over, and you'll be hoping it's not over soon, but what do you want to do with life?
I want to travel. That's one of the things I really love. And one of the great opportunities you have as Premier is to go to many countries as Premier, but I'd love to go back to a number of those countries as a tourist, to spend not just a week or 2 weeks there, but to spend some months there and live among some of the various cultures around the world.
Good luck in a couple of weeks. Dr. Denis Napthine, Premier of Victoria, thank you for spending a few minutes with me.
Thanks so much, Dennis.
That's a pleasure. It's 14 to 3. Paul Harris takes us to the cinema coming up next.